Okay, so this is going to be a guide on tanking Hive Queen. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, a couple things to note about this boss fight. Compared to, for example, Iron Conqueror, Hive Queen has a much shorter and condensed rotation. It consists of pretty much only 4 attacks that essentially repeat endlessly throughout the rest of the fight, making it much easier for you to sort of memorize things. However, execution also has to be on point now. So what I mean by that is compared to, for example, say Scion's Keep, where, if you get knocked down or knocked up here and there, as long as you're not like critically low in health, you'll generally survive an attack. Getting knocked back by Hive Queen, for example, pretty much just means that the aggro holder is all but certain to die. So, looking at the beginning of this fight, you can see that the room is sort of divvied up into 6 pieces. You see one right here, another is like right here-ish, yet another right here, another here, one here, and this last piece. Up here we have a 12 o'clock position. Apologies for bad handwriting. And over here we have sort of the 11 o'clock position. The way the boss's initial mechanics work is that in this center zone, we're going to have a massive buff for 3 ranged people that will be contributing the majority of the DPS. At this 12 o'clock zone, we're going to have a few lines that appear. They're going to appear in green. They'll form sort of an insta-kill zone. These lines will rotate sort of clockwise around the map. And if they ever make contact with players, they'll just instantly kill them. And if they ever make contact with the boss, she will instantly enrage and wipe out the rest of the party. As a result, generally, tank is going to be starting at the 11 o'clock position, aggroing the boss from there. So if you look at my map at the top right, because I understand that from this point of view it looks a little disorienting, but if you look at my map at the right, I am right here at this 11 o'clock position. And my teammates are just sort of standing to my right at around the 8 o'clock-ish, or 8, 9 o'clock-ish position. So one thing to note is that whether you choose to aggro her by using a ranged attack or just sort of walking into range at her, the first thing she's going to do is charge at you. So here I throw my Z, get a bit of a ranged aggro. You can see that she turns and she's immediately going to try to charge at me. This charge inflicts a knockdown, so you do want to iframe this. So you can see there I SS it, and this will be the first attack. It's not actually part of her main rotation. It's just sort of how she opens up the fight. It is what a lot of people will call an indignity scan. She will do this at the tank, mainly trying to hit the tank. And the primary job that you'll be doing throughout the rest of this fight is, because she will be using them multiple times throughout the fight, is facing these scans away from your teammates. If you or your teammates get hit by them, you will essentially get a stack of indignity. Think of it very much like a Raven King punishment. You'll get a pretty harsh dot on you. You can usually survive like 1 to maybe 2-ish. After that, it's actually quite difficult for you or your teammates to survive. After that, boss is going to enter her basic rotation. So you can see here these triple swipes are her first attack. They are also her third attack. They are a yellow attack. They're aimed at the tank. They are blockable. However, because of the boss's rotation, you generally will not be blocking these attacks, either with your 1 or with your F block. You really want to be maintaining DPS, because during the second and fourth attack, you don't really have options to maintain DPS. So these triple swipes are pretty much your only chance at, generating threat. And while the people at the center won't be generating threat due to the buff that they receive, So you can see here on my map at the top right that I have these people entering the center of the room. They're currently right here-ish, a little bit off my screen. They will receive a buff. You'll slowly start to see them make their way to the top of the DPS meter. You generally don't have to worry about them generating threat because the buff continuously removes their threat, but you'll need to maintain threat off of everyone else who's not there. And these triple swipes are essentially your only chance at really maintaining threat. Right behind me, you can see that these lines have appeared. These are the insta-kill lines that I mentioned about before earlier. And sort of around the room in this perimeter, you sort of see this sort of glow type area. This is also an insta-kill zone. So you and your team will need to pay attention to that. So after these triple swipes, this is her second attack. It is arguably her most important attack and probably the one that will take the most time learning initially. It is a 2-pulse knockback. So there's the first one, there's the second one. As the tank, well, at this point, if you get knocked back, you'll likely get knocked back into that death zone and die anyway. But even after the death zone moves and isn't behind you, if for whatever reason you get knocked back, if you're at range, the boss is essentially just going to insta-kill you. Similar to how Raven King will do his little finger animation and insta-kill you, she'll do the exact same thing. For the team members behind you, they need to also be careful with this attack. It is AoE. There's no avoiding it. If you're melee anyway, there's no avoiding it. They need to position themselves as well. I frame this, make sure that they don't get knocked back either, because otherwise they're liable to get knocked back into that insta-kill zone in the perimeter. And the people in the center also have to be careful, make sure that they don't get either knocked back into the death zone behind them or even just knocked out of the circle and get the debuff that prevents them from getting the massive DPS gain. So here's the triple swipe. It is her third attack, same as the first. And here we see the fourth attack. The fourth attack is a phantom grip on the tank. And you have two options to CC the boss. You could either stun it or knock it down. Stunning it sort of maintains the rotation, resets it. And knocking down sort of does the mechanic. You'll generally start off with 2 stuns. Quick thing to note about this attack is that if you look at my X, it is on cooldown. There is a small window of opportunity where you can still perform certain actions before the phantom grip actually lands, and during that period of time you can actually contribute to some CC. If the boss is not CC'd, the tank will just die. So reset, triple swipe, double pulse knockback, triple swipe again, and CC. So that flash step was an accident, by the way. It was not intentional. You don't want to face these attacks at your teammates. They will lose a lot of damage. Double pulse and then triple swipe again. This is what you generally want to be doing, just sort of facing the attacks away from your teammates and then walking out of them. It's just sort of a bit of a different tanking that I use compared to, for example, SK, where I try to stand still. You're just going to have to sort of adapt to this style. Now, around at the third CC opening is where you would normally do a potential knockdown. However, in this example, DPS was quite high, and if that's the case, you can actually skip the entire first mech phase and just continuously stun the boss. That's sort of what we did here. So unfortunately, that means you are not going to see any driving up through the first phase. You're just going to see me handle the basic rotation. That's okay, the mech phase is the same, and it just sort of repeats itself during the second phase. Not too much of an issue. You do want to practice this basic rotation though, so because it is used throughout the rest of the fight, and it really does need to be executed pretty much flawlessly. So entering the 70% phase, the boss will fly to the center, deactivate the center buff, and fly into the air. Similar to Raven King, she is now untargetable. And you will get these ads that spawn. So if we're looking at the map, right here was this 11 o'clock zone that I was sort of standing at. And you can see that an ad has spawned there. There's also an ad over here-ish, sort of like the 3 o'clock position, and an ad over here-ish, sort of, I guess, like, I don't know, 7-ish o'clock position. So you can see that by looking at my map here where my teammates are. You can sort of see it right there. It's one section, sort of like another section. This drawing is so terrible. Right there, that should be more like that. Yeah, this drawing was terrible, bad idea. So, you know, sort of, I guess, closer to like this ish is where this drawing is not much better. But that's sort of closer to where it's like, and the ads are going to spawn for the first mech phase here, here, and here. Now what you can see is that I am getting hit by a red attack. A key thing about the boss is that the first 3 people to whack the boss, and since you're the tank, you're definitely one of them, are going to get these snipes thrown at them, similar to Raven King snipes. As you are about to see, I forgot to Hung Moon block this or call for a sheath. They do a ton of damage. I took like 47% of my HP right there. Lost a massive chunk. You will want to Hung Moon block for this or call out for a sheath if your Hung Moon block is on cooldown. They will go to the first 3 people. They are AoE. Be careful not to walk into splash damage. And then your team will deal with the mech phase. Now, as I said, there are 3 ads that have spawned, and there's also a few other smaller ads that have spawned as well. You can't really see them too well, but if you look over here at this side of the screen, you can see one of the like smaller bugs. There'll be a total of 5 of them. Normally as tank, I kind of, if your team's DPS is good enough, which usually it is, I kind of don't bother too much going in there because it can be a bit detrimental or dangerous to the tank's health. But if you have to, you generally want to go to the one closest to 11 o'clock because you'll constantly be starting the fight at 11 o'clock between each mech phase. But usually someone will push them all in, pull them all into the center, and then group them all up with a pull and then push them all into the large ad with some kind of a push. You can actually see that a bit if you're looking at the right of my screen as well. And then usually your team will just DPS them down. Once they're DPS down, you can see these red sort of AoEs. The mites will explode and deal a ton of damage to both the fallen spider and any teammates around them. Sort of the reason why I kind of avoid that area. And I focus on calling out these indignity bombs that are being thrown. So if you've been paying attention, the boss has been throwing these sort of indignity bombs. They essentially, if you make contact with them, do give you a stack of that indignity stack, similar to if you got hit by one of those scans. The indignity bombs will always be thrown in the 3 quadrants that are, the 3 sections that are not occupied by these spiders. And they can be jumped over, even if you're in combat. But, the advantage of sort of being in this free area is that you get to leave combat and just sort of run. Afterwards, the boss will throw her 3 snipes again. So, being out of combat and being able to whirlwind run is actually quite useful for dodging that as well. As the 3 ads die, you see that I have returned on my map at the top right. I have returned to my 11 o'clock position. That is where this is, this 11 o'clock position. Boss is in the air up here. You can see her HP. She's about to come back down to the center, and we're essentially going to repeat the phase. as it were. So here she's going to come down any second once that ad dies. And if you recall, she started off by charging at us. That is exactly what she's going to do, charge at us. Here you're going to see me mess up the mech because I did not iframe correctly. And this is what happens when you do that. You end up throwing in dignity scans at your team. Not to worry, as long as it's just one, not a big deal. They'll generally be able to survive one, but you do want to get that mechanic down. So again, triple swipe, double pulse, knockback. You can see again that the death zone has still formed right behind me. Nothing has changed. The boss has healed a bit. That's what those large spiders did. They tried to heal the boss. You generally want to make sure that you heal the boss as little as possible during that mech phase. And again, you're going to stun at the very beginning. You'll usually still stun the first two. So again, the rotation will repeat as is. Again, second stun. And here during the second mech phase, you usually will not be able to avoid doing the mechanic even with pretty solid DPS. So you can see here that here we have a knockdown, sorry. And this will normally happen during the first phase, during that 100 to 70%, unless your team has very good DPS. You'll have to do this pretty much all three phases. Now, important thing to note here is after you do a knockdown, the boss will do a get up attack. It inflicts a knockback, so you want to F block this. So you can see I F blocked that, and then immediately I start turning around and walking away. Now, at this point, the boss is going to say something to you. And what she says will determine sort of where you move. I'll try to incorporate some of the original audio from the actual clear, although apologies in advance if I do, you're probably going to hear quite a bit of clicking. But she'll either say how droll or something else. All you need to pay attention to is whether or not she says how droll or something else. So here, she has said how droll. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to be on this stream or not, but another way you can check is by looking at it in your chat. Now, unfortunately, mine is blocked off by this picture that I have in order to, well, block my chat. But you can pay attention to there, or you can just turn up, mess around with your audio settings in Windows to up Blade and Soul volume and sort of up boss volume in your game settings. But you'll pay attention to what she says. If she says how droll, you'll need to gap close into the boss and get behind her. So here I use my 2 and then I E behind the boss. Important part with this boss's mechanic is you really do want to keep your gap closers open. So usually your 2 in draw stance is something that I'm careful when using. Lightning BM badge does reset, Lightning BM Aransu badge does reset the cooldown of 2, so you'll sometimes see me use it throughout the fight regardless. But for the most part, you're going to want to hold on to it for this mechanic. So if she says how droll, you're going to want to gap close into the boss, get behind her, because that's signifying that the boss is going to dash away from the tank. And if I had stayed walking away from her, she would have that, like if I had still been on the other side of the boss, she would have dashed backwards towards that insta kill zone perimeter, towards that perimeter, and if she had hit that, then she would just instantly wipe the party. And even if she doesn't hit that, you can see that at the top, the lasers are already moving. They're already over here-ish. And so even if she doesn't move far enough to cause an instant rage mechanic, then by the time you get to the next rotation, the lasers will have moved closer, and your job here is, in this entire fight, is to essentially, drive the boss away from those lasers. So she won't always say how droll. It's completely random as to whether she'll say how droll or something else. If she says the other one, something besides How's Roll, it pretty much means that she's going to charge at the tank. Here she said How's Roll, so she is going to charge away from the tank. So I 2'd, got behind her. You can see that she went away. I stayed in basic stance so that I could 2 back to the boss, and I'm going to Q behind her. The reason I'm doing this is because immediately after this, she is going to do an indignity scan on the tank. So that's why you need to practice this driving. This driving is arguably the hardest part of the fight for the tank. You're really going to want to keep this away from your teammates. So you can see here, this is a pretty good scan. It's avoiding the center, which is where 3 of the highest DPSs are, and it's avoiding my party members, which are on the opposite side of the boss right now. So again, you can see that my teammates are like here-ish and here-ish. So there, and the scan is covering this sort of area. So this is an example of how you actually want to do it. And then you can just sort of casually walk out. Now, after a knockdown phase, she is going to do these 2 indignity waves. These are actually iframeable. You can personally iframe them, or you can Hangman block, or you can sheath, or whatever. So as a result, we usually do Hangman block. You can see that I just used Hangman block, protecting the team. She does that twice. And now here, normally she would plant the bug bombs on one of the people in the center. After I don't know, like a patch or 2 ago, that has been removed, so that makes that mechanic non-existent. The only thing you need to worry about is if you get to this phase, you want to hold off a bit and still let her do this infest someone with insects mechanic before pushing her down to 40%, because otherwise she sometimes does instantly enrage and wipe the party. But she's at 55% right now, so no big deal. So this is some great time to do some DPS as well, and then she'll return to her rotation. 3 hits, knockback, pulse, the knockback pulse, 3 hits again, and then CC. Now, again, you'll want to be paying attention to where the death lasers are and how your team's DPS is doing, because normally you would continuously knock down, but because our DPS is pretty solid, we're just going to stun. And there you go. So triple swipe, knockback pulse twice, and triple swipe again. And you can see here that the lasers are getting pretty close, but our DPS is good. Boss is at 42% HP, so we are going to stun again because the next mechanic phase starts at 40%. So if your team's DPS is lower than this, then you're going to need to be doing a lot more knockdowns and a lot more of those phases that you had seen earlier. So at 40%, you can see things turn off. She's going to jump back into the center, reset. This time, hopefully I don't forget my Hangman block. I did not. So you can see that the 3 snipes come out. You can also see that if you're looking at the map, I'm now at 11 o'clock. And previously, there was an ad here and here. That ad is no longer here. Right, these 3 areas. So right here-ish, and right here-ish were where the ads first spawned. They are now spawned in the previously empty slots. And that means that these 3 slots are where the indignity bombs or blasts or whatever are going to end up going. So you can see that after the snipes that she has thrown, she's going to throw those blasts. You can see them at the top. They're falling into the first empty spots. I usually call this out for my team since I'm not doing the actual mech phases. And yeah, call them out. Use Windwalk to just easily jump over them and run past the snipes. Nothing here changes. Same thing as the first, just sort of the locations just either move either clockwise or counterclockwise, doesn't matter. There's only 6 pieces. So again, the boss starts off the fight. We're again at 11 o'clock, and she's going to charge us. So here I do not mess up the mechanic, so that's good. And triple swipe. And then knockback pulse, 2 of them. Then we're going to do another triple swipe, followed by CC. This time we're going to stun twice like we normally do. and we're going to repeat that one more time. Now, normally at this phase, you don't really have an option. You pretty much will be stunning twice and then knocking down pretty much afterwards. I guess you can possibly stun here and there depending on how close your tank is driving, but that's about it. There is one change here. So you can see here that once again, at the third one, we have done a knockdown. So she is going to do a get up knockback attack. I am blocking that. And I am walking away from the boss. So I don't remember what she says here. Maybe again, I can incorporate that into the stream. I'm not certain. But here she has said, how droll, in case you did not get a chance to hear that. She ended up saying how droll, and that means she is going to charge away from the tank. So I'm going to face her again, press 2 and E. So there we go. You can see that. So she's going to run away from me. So I'm going to walk in, 2 to gap close again, and Q, this time facing the scanner away from my party again. Now, she will do the blasts again. We can Hung Moon block that or call for personal iframes. Now, there is one difference that happens at the after the 40% phase, which is after she does this infection on someone, she will spawn a lone spider ad to heal. You can see that it is up there by the death zone, sort of covered up a bit. You will want to send one of your teammates or 2 of your teammates to do the push-pull mechanic, and then your center members, which I know I have characters off, but the 3 people in here can just sort of turn on that and then just burst the ad after the mech phase is done. One last difference is that you will see this brand new attack that the boss does after she finishes doing her infection mechanic. She will throw a soul indignity bomb. You probably saw that at the furthest person, so you probably saw her launch it over here. You can see the perimeter is again over here, again a bit cut off by my UI. So you'll want one person to bait that pretty far so that you do not have to bother jumping over it. If they don't bait it far enough, then your centers and possibly even you might have to hop over it. It is hoppable, so you can spacebar jump it, but it is not iframeable if I'm not mistaken. And so after that, she will continue with the mechanic. And you will most likely, like I said, continue with the knockdowns during the first hit. So here we see a knockdown, which means I'm going to F block the get up attack. And again, I'm going to walk away from her regardless. And again, I will try to incorporate some actual original sound. Don't know if that'll work. So here, again, she said, how droll, which means that I have to turn around and 2 into the boss. And here I'm doing something a bit different. I don't know. I am driving very, very close to this center circle. Sort of, so you can see my 3 centers are right here. And I'm driving super close. This is something that you're going to need to practice. The closer you drive, the more leeway you have in terms of making sure that the boss doesn't touch that death zone. So you can see sort of to my left, again, kind of blocked. But this is where the 3 lines are that signify the death zone. And because BMQE is 180 degrees, the angle at which you're going to approach the boss and the angle at which you end up where you Q or E is going to determine the angle at which you're going to drive her. So by driving like this sharp at this sharp of an angle to the boss, I'm ensuring that her charge, when she charges this away, sort of covers the maximum amount of distance. And so that's something that you're going to need to get used to. This driving mechanic is easily the hardest part of the fight for the tank. So here you can see that I Q'd E'd and the boss dashed quite far. And then I'm just going to 2 back at the boss, and then Q behind it, and face the indignity bast away. Now, here you do have to be a bit careful. So you can see that I have, or you may not be able to see, I have some teammates here that are handling the ad. Not much you can really do about them. You'd rather they get the indignity stacks than, all the people that are over here. But you also want to be careful for yourself as well, because there's these small ads over here. If by the time you drive and by the time she's starting her normal attacks, these things have not exploded, you're going to want to stand sort of closer to like here-ish in the beginning so that you don't get caught up in those explosions. Because, like I said, those will do a lot of damage to you and can possibly get you killed. So, again, face the indignity stacks away. The 2 blasts here, I just self-iframed with a 3. That's sort of the one good thing, is that pretty much your 3 iframe will always be up since you aren't really using it except for these blasts. So there are the 2 shockwaves. Again, because it's past the 40% phase, she's going to throw that orb at the furthest person after she does this infection on someone. Great times to do DPS. So you can see the orb explode at the top, and we're going to get back to the same rotation. So triple swipe, knockdown pulse, triple swipe again, and then you're going to get a knockdown. You're going to F block that knock up attack, and again, trying to incorporate some audio. Not sure if it's going to work, but we're going to see what she says. So, apologies if I did actually incorporate audio. You probably saw some loud clicking. But here she said this might hurt a little bit. That is obviously not how troll, which means this time she is going to charge the tank. I believe that's the only time she has said that this fight. So unfortunately, this guide does not show you many examples of this. But essentially what you're going to do, since you were already walking away from her, you're going to face her and you're going to iframe the charge. So I SS it. So there you go. There's a charge. And then I just sort of face, just sort of position myself so that the scan isn't really hitting the circle. One thing you can do is when you initially SS and she's facing you, you can sort of use a movement ability. So flash step would have been a good choice here to just sort of flash step up here. As it stands though, this is still pretty solid. It cuts through a bit of the circle. There's some team members here, but they can easily just move out. So it's not too big of an issue. And then you're going to proceed. Now, when the fight gets this close, you can see that the boss is at 5%. Even though she's going to summon an ad, we have enough time to sort of just burst the boss and ignore the ad. So that's essentially what we're going to do. And there you go. You're going to just continue with the rotation, and that's your clear. So, unfortunately, this guide did not include many examples of driving, just because of team DPS. That is just sort of normal. As your DPS gets higher, your team is going to have to deal with significantly less of those driving mechanics. But I suppose the key things to note that you're going to need to work on is initially you're going to need to work on handling those knockback pulses. So that's something that you and your teams are going to have to deal with, is the knockbacks that are part of her second attack. You're going to need to get used to calling out those CCs. You'll start off with usually two instances of stun followed by knockbacks, but that's something that'll change with DPS. You'll need to adapt to determine whether or not you want to stun at a certain point or just continue with knockbacks, knockdowns. And then the third thing you're going to need to do as tank is pay attention to the boss and learn the sort of driving mechanic that there is to her. So you'll be paying attention. If it's how droll, you need to know that you need to gap close into the boss, get behind her so that she runs away from you. And if it's not how droll, you're going to keep running away from the boss and iframe the charge because she's going to charge at you. Once you get that down to it, the mechanic essentially repeats itself. It is not a very how would I say it? It's not a boss fight where there's many changing parts to it. Once you get like that 70% mech phase done, and if you do it well, there's the 40% mech phase. Up until 40%, it's all going to be the same, and even post 40%, there's really not that much of a difference. And so getting down the first mech phase is pretty much it. Like, after you get it down, the rest is just going to be execution. Conceptually, you'll have understood the fight. And so that about wraps it up for this. And thanks for watching.